So, Paul, Joe Biden, perhaps the most well known of, I guess we would call him a potential candidate at this point, could announce that he's coming in any moment. Um, let's just talk about. Let's just start with what your sense is of how he is seen by the a large portion of the Democratic Party today, because it has been almost 12 years in some ways since he's had his own identity that wasn't so tied into the Obama presidency. But give me your sense of just like, what the thumbnail of Joe Biden is today.
I think we're going to see, and maybe we're already seeing, a big generational divide in how Democrats view him, because he is in many ways such a kind of old school politician in both style and substance. And you're right, he was a guy who had been in the Senate for over 30 years, ran for president unsuccessfully a couple times. And then when Obama plucked him to be his vice president, that kind of gave him a new political life. And by all accounts, he was a very successful vice president, especially when it came to getting the stimulus implemented. That was something that people who reported on that, which are not very many reporters, since that kind of stuff doesn't get a lot of attention, they say he really did a terrific job on that. But now, he is, as you say, coming out and kind of presenting himself as his own man anew. And we're seeing all the things about his prior record get reexamined in the light of how people look at politics and things like gender relations in 2019. And so he's got a lot of his record that he can point to that's very positive, but also things like what his management of the Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings are getting reevaluated. His work on the 1994 crime bill, which was extremely harsh. His things like that are getting viewed again, and you kind of get the sense that he's not necessarily so prepared for this.
Yes.
And right now he doesn't have a campaign, which I think may make it a little worse as this new controversy over his handsiness has come up. He doesn't have an apparatus. He's not out there every day talking to reporters and to voters. He's just got a couple of sort of spokespeople around him who are trying to handle it. But I think this is an interesting sort of symbolic moment, even beyond the substance of how he deals with people and what that says about him. You're seeing this politician who's in his mid-70s suddenly have to account for behaviors that he's been doing forever,
right,
but suddenly are being judged by a different set of standards.
Right. I mean, that is an apt metaphor in many respects, because the ground has shifted, it seems to me, so dramatically over the past 5 to 10 years, maybe even the less, maybe a more narrow, but certainly in the wake of the financial crisis, I think, which is what brought a lot of this stuff to head, and of course, other cultural, socio-cultural dynamics. But let me ask you this. Let's just start with this, because you mentioned that Joe Biden has run for president at least 2 other times, I think it was, and he wasn't, it wasn't close, right? Like, he wasn't one of those people who came in like third. He was one of those people who was out really early. In both instances, of course, back, I think it was in '88, he was out because of a plagiarism scandal. And we can talk about that, but, well, let me ask you this. Why do you think he's waited so long to get in? I mean, that's, and I bring this up because I want to first deal with his skill set as a politician, and then go back on his record, which I think, oddly enough, there's a generational divide in terms of Joe Biden, but the generation that's not aware of some of his politics, I think, from back in the day, they tend to be the most skeptical of him. Which is an interesting dynamic, but just in terms of his skill as a politician, like, what's the theory with him waiting this long, do you think, if he ultimately decides to run, or maybe he hasn't decided to run?
Well, the interesting thing about him is that unlike many politicians, he's never been coy about his desire to be president. But things always seem to conspire against him. As you said, the first time he ran, he had that plagiarism scandal and pulled out before there were any votes. The second time he ran in 2008, he did really poorly in the Iowa caucus and then pulled out right after Iowa, and so that was it for him. Then, he signed on as Obama's vice president, and in 2016, he surely wanted to run again, but was basically, looked at the situation and was made to understand that, this was Hillary Clinton's turn. And the whole party was lining up behind her, and he was going to have a very tough time. But he never let go of his desire to be president. And so this time around, I think that he really has seemed like he can't decide if he can really do it or not.
Right.
Is he too old? Are there too many other new and interesting candidates? Is it going to be too difficult? So I think that's been the delay. But I think he also has felt probably with some justification. If he looks at the polls, he can say, well, I'm still the most known. I'm at the top of the polls. I'm pulling 25-30% more than anybody else. Bernie Sanders may be close behind, but he probably thinks, I don't need to, beat Beto O'Rourke to the next event because I can get in a little later. So I think that's probably what he's thinking, but he's never made any bones about the fact that he would like to be president, and he thinks he should be.
Do you think that he's been, in terms of this period where, the run up to him running, that I can think of two occasions where and he's probably done more, but I haven't been, I haven't been watching him closely, where he has done this thing where he crosses himself as a good Catholic and says something to the effect of "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned," in the context of a couple of different things. I think one of them was sort of having friends with Republicans. And maybe saying some other stuff that was there. There's a defensiveness there that makes me feel like maybe he is aware that he's a little bit out of step and isn't quite sure what is going on. Like, let's talk about the Stacey Abrams thing. His camp denies that they floated the idea of Stacey Abrams being his vice president. And it was quite clear within a couple of days, based upon her response, that this is nothing that was run by her at all. Something like this also happened with Elizabeth Warren back in 2016 when he was contemplating running. It seems to me that that's also a metaphor of some of his problems. The idea that, maybe back in the day you felt like as a politician like this, that whatever my status is, this other person should be, grateful or can't do anything about me sort of leveraging them. And, it's quite clear what the idea is. I want to project to people that I would pick someone like Stacey Abrams or Stacey Abrams herself, because that means that I'm amenable in certain areas that maybe people perceive as being a deficit, right? Questions of race, questions of gender. What does that tell us about? What do you think about the fact that Stacey Abrams, when she was asked this on the View, right, and she could have said, "I'm really flattered. The idea of being Joe Biden's VP is, would be quite an honor, but I'm not interested in that." She didn't say that. She just said, "I'm not running for second place. Nobody would want to do that." What do you make of that? Like, what do you think he picked up any type of signal from that? Because he got away with it with Elizabeth Warren back in 2016. But what's your sense of that?
Yeah, I think the Stacey Abrams thing is fascinating. It's unclear whether it was just something that his staff might have floated, and maybe to convince him that it was a good idea. But as you say, wherever it came from, it died pretty quick. But what's interesting is that they represent two things that are so different. Not just because she's young and he's old, and she's a black woman and he's a white man, but they have fundamentally different ideas about what the Democratic Party needs to do to win. Stacey Abrams, her political philosophy is that Democrats need to find the voters who are not voting. She has started 2 different organizations devoted to registering people and securing voting rights. And she, as a politician in Georgia, spent lots of time going out and meeting all the voters she could from every area and people of all races. However, she was quite clear that the way for Democrats to win was not to go to the center and not to chase after that elusive white male, but to get all of those disengaged voters who are sort of Democrats in waiting, get them registered and get them to the polls. And she did it and almost won. And some people, including herself, I think, would think that she actually won. Was it not for the vote suppression of her opponent? But
Paul,
that's the philosophy that she represents, and Joe Biden is exactly the opposite. The whole the basis of his political persona and the reason why he's supposed to be electable is not because he's going to mobilize Democrats, but because he's the guy who can speak to those people in the diners in the Midwest, the white men who feel like they're being left behind. Joe Biden is supposed to be the guy who could reach out to them.
Right,
and so they're 2 so different political personas and philosophies about how Democrats can win.
Paul, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more in just a moment.